Whenever we talk about destiny, we're also called to talk about fate. And I find that most modern people are actually more resistant to the idea of fate than they are of destiny. Fate is related to the circumstances and events that occur that we as individuals do not directly choose. And this can extend from the force of gravity itself to the place that we are born into. It relates to the aspects of reality that occur regardless of how we feel about it, or what we think about it, or what we wish would be instead. And if we really sit back and are honest with ourselves, an enormous amount of life as we experience it is fated. There are systems and structures, both man-made and created by nature itself, that are fated. And this is something that can be difficult to accept because a big part of the message that we get in our culture has to do with individual choice. And individual choice can be wonderful, and it definitely has a place in reality. And yet, at the same time, one has to understand what is within their control and what is not, in order to actually be able to exert the power that you have at your disposal. Because if you don't recognize what was fated and what is within your purview to actually alter, then you may end up directing your limited resources, for we all have limited resources, at something that is not going to budge, or something that if we approached it differently, if we changed our perspective on it or our relationship to it, would give us more momentum, like the wind at our back, as opposed to drag. And that's why today I want to talk about how our ancestors influence our destiny. Destiny begins to emerge when we recognize that the fated circumstances are much like a soil, and the seeds held within that soil are the potential for your destiny. They hold the essence of it. And what is required is for the soul to begin to merge more deeply with the fated circumstances, in the sense of becoming aware of them, waking up to them. This requires the personality, the ego, or the small self to begin to synchronize with the bigger aspects of self, with the more expansive and divine aspects of self. And when this happens, the soul begins to act like a sun and water. It brings the rains, and it begins to nourish and awaken this seed potential held within the fated circumstances. And as it grows, so does your destiny. Because fated circumstances, without this deeper awareness of the more divine aspects of ourself, is really just mechanical. It creates a type of momentum that we are caught within and can do nothing about. It is the metaphor of sleepwalking through life. We're just cogs caught in something that will work itself out like a machine. But it is this deeper awareness, this soul essence that comes online, that can begin to activate that seed potential. And now when it comes to fated circumstances, there are very few forces that are as impactful as ancestry. Why? Because our ancestry is literally the portal that the soul works with to come into physical reality. You come out of other people. You come out of your mother. And that means that the place and time that you were born in is related to ancestry. The body that you have, the upbringing that you got, the economic circumstances that you were raised within, and also the karma that exists inside of your line. The wounds, the pains, the stories, but also the gifts, the talents, the capacities that come in through ancestry. The religion that you were exposed to growing up, which has altered and affected at some level your sense of the divine. All of this and more comes in through ancestry. And when we extend beyond just your individual family, there is the ancestry of the human species itself. For you are in a human body and capable of experiencing life as a human being because of the ancestral inheritance over billions of years that have led you to be human in the flesh on planet Earth. So ancestry plays a critical role in fated circumstances, and what we have today is thousands of years of ancestor practices that have not been done. So the state of our ancestry and the state of humanity itself over the last few millennia has been in a state of high static. And by that, I mean a lot of noise and inharmonious, incongruent signals coming from the dead and from the systems that they leave behind. For as Daniel 4 has been known to say, the ghosts are baked into the system. So a lot of the systemic challenges that have emerged over the last few thousand years are partly, if not overwhelmingly, ancestral. What ends up happening when cultures do not have healthy ancestor practices to tend to the dead is that human life begins to backlog because of the unlived destinies of the dead, because of the stories that they never got to complete, because of the fated circumstances that they deeply resisted and were warped and wefted by, leaving behind all of this noise. And for indigenous cultures that have these established and stable ancestor practices, these elements of life and death do not backlog like a dam holding back a river. They are dealt with on a consistent basis and are baked into their systems, allowing for there to be a healthy flow of the ancestral waters through life. And thus all of these wounds and all of these unlived circumstances, all of these destinies, these seeds that went to ground and never blossomed, are worked out. And thus, destiny for the individual person is easier, or one might say there is less drag, less resistance holding them back. And this allows for a very different set of circumstances than those we find ourselves in today. And those circumstances are characterized by most people experiencing their ancestry as drag, as something that is literally pulling on their ability to actualize their destiny in a way that is not supportive, but that offers primarily challenge or a sense of complete emptiness when it comes to the potential support that a person could have from ancestry. And what we really would want is for ancestry to be the wind at our back that is propelling us forward to actualize our worldly destiny and even our spiritual destiny. And this can be accomplished in part by having healthy ancestral practices and by engaging in some kind of lineage repair process and cleaning up the karmic lines as they move through into our own individual life. But more so, what I want to discuss today even is to begin to recognize this impact in your own life and to bring awareness, which is often the first step, to this set of fated circumstances that you have of your ancestor inheritance. And while this can be exceedingly multifaceted and can take on a wide variety of potential expressions, I want to point you towards three that are often central and critical to be able to give you an approach and an entry into what we're discussing today. That is how ancestors affect destiny. The first of which is your genetic inheritance, your physical body, which is something that is bequeathed upon you by your ancestors. The body is an ancestral phenomenon. And bodies have memories. Inside your body, there could be memories that are 10, 20, 30,000 years old, that are just related to human line ancestral events. Deeper than that, there is, of course, the whole of life's memory held within your body from an evolutionary timeline. But that is a little bit more difficult to make practical. Today, I would just want to point you towards the body's memories, but also not just that, but the very obvious aspects of what did you inherit from your line. Is your body gifted in a particular way? That is, that you notice the pattern of psychic predisposition, for example, showing up in your line. Some people might be more clairvoyant or clairaudient, and you notice that pattern showing up in grandparents or great-grandparents. Possibly you have a line of musicians and people who were gifted in music in some form or another, and you have this predisposition, and it just feels as if your body was made to do it. Maybe you have an ancestral inheritance of athleticism, and there is this raw physical vitality that can just work and work and work. And all of this is useful information because it shows you, it gives you a piece of the fated circumstances that can act as a seed potential for how to live out your destiny on a day-to-day level. But also, this involves your diseases, so to speak, the ancestral debilitations that you've gotten from your genetics. How is your body predisposed to break down? And this can show up in heart disease and kidney disease and cancer and diabetes and the like. So you get to recognize what's coming in and possibly live your life in a different way so as to protect yourself from that potential debilitation, which shows up in, again, day-to-day life. And now this ties into the other element, which is the stories coming in through your ancestral line. And we cannot really separate the stories from the genetic inheritance because stories do not just live in your mind, they live in your body. A story is an energetic phenomenon. It is a type of field and it is configured in a particular way. Stories are shaped energetically in a particular way. And when you are cohered with a story, when you are truly attuned to it, your body begins to resonate with the shape of the story. And a lot of diseases actually emerge out of the stories that we have acquired. But not just that, a lot of the gifts do as well. And so by understanding the stories that have emerged from your line, you get to understand what type of story the soul has decided to step into and be a character within. Because we are all characters in ancestral stories. And so once we recognize that, we can start to question how this story is affecting us. What are these stories telling us about life? And they can be difficult to recognize because for many people, these stories are akin to the water that a fish swims within. You were born and raised in the context of these stories. And the way to find these are which emotional charges are held within the line and what cosmological beliefs about the very nature of life and death are held within the line. What parts of reality, as you have been exposed to it, are either glorified or ignored. And as you understand this, you can grasp the shape of this story that is affecting you and that you are living out. And how can you transmute that? How can you take that story and give it the light of your soul in order for it to be a compost, a soil that nourishes that seed potential of your destiny? And lastly, I want to point you towards the unlived destinies, the seeds that went to ground and never got to blossom and flourish that exist within your line. This accumulation of unlived potential that is often a lot like a curse. Why? Because you have all of these ancestral forces and spirits that are trying to live out their destiny through you. They have unfinished business, what we might call hungry ghost, that want to hijack your life in order to finish out what they could not, in order to complete what they could not. And so in this way, they block you from being able to actualize your unique individual destiny in the world. And unless you come from a line with very connected and clear ancestral practices that are unbroken for thousands of years, I promise you that some of that is there in your experience. And I want to invite you to consider a possibility. If you are listening to this podcast, then perhaps a part of your destiny is to be somebody who wakes up to this situation that we're all contending with in today's world when it comes to our ancestral inheritances, and to actually do something about it. To begin to engage more deeply with the ancestors, to help the ancestral lines clear their karma, to connect into the deep support that they can offer, to let that work spill out into the familial lines, and from there to be able to start from a more clear place to actually begin bringing your own destiny as a unique individual about. And that's the funny thing about fated circumstances, is that it's a lot harder to actualize your own individual destiny until you recognize that your story is a part of the story of the ancestors, and that the story of the ancestors connects into the story of life and death itself.